Hi, everybody. As she said, I'm Mayan. And I, unlike right now, I'm actually wearing a lot of hats in podcasting, like many of you, as the content strategist and podcast librarian at RadioPublic. Coolest job in the world, by the way. I love wearing my content party hat. I wore it a lot at my last job, where I was managing social media and content strategy at Oberlin College. But right now in Podlandia, way better, because all of you make things. It is amazing, and I get to celebrate that every single day. I also really, really love breaking down every single thing that we make into much smaller pieces, and then we organize them in other ways. I love doing creative work once, and then making the most of it, consistently and easily in more than one place. I also really love podcasts, like a lot. I love that people make them, I love listening to them, and I really love talking about them. I also like podcasts. Okay, good, you guys laughed, thank you. I was so worried. Podcasts, cat's pajamas. But podcasts are important and podcats are important because if you didn't know this already, cats power the internet. And the internet powers podcasts. We're going to merge podcasts and the glorious thing that are the internet together for audience growth. That's right, we're going to do exactly that. I like that the internet is a place of possibility. I don't think it's going to save the world, but I do think that we are going to be a part of that. I believe that it's a place of possibility for podcasts too. Podcasts exist because of the internet. And I help podcasts and the rest of the internet get closer together, to work together well, and to learn from each other. I am joined by my friend Pusheen the cat. If you have never met Pusheen before, welcome. So please enjoy the beautiful stylings of Claire Belton as I talk about web strategy and podcasts and the beautiful things that they can become together. So we're gonna be talking about 3 primary sections of the internet and how and why we're going to use them for your podcast audience development strategies. Those things are going to be websites, email campaigns, and social media campaigns. I know that overwhelm and anxiety can lead to procrastination, but here's the thing, I know all of you here can do this, and here is why I know this. You have made an amazing thing. The awesome audio you made is just the start, and we are going to get people to your show. We're going to engage and retain your listeners, and we're gonna do it all with the power of your brand and the power of the web. Yes? Yes, everybody? Yes, good. Thank you. Web strategy is achievable for every single podcaster, whether you're working solo, on a team, or with a network or studio. A lot of what I'm going to describe today is work that you do one time, or sometimes rather than all of the time. And especially if you're a solo or an indie out here, strategy is your support. That's it. And building an adaptable web marketing strategy is going to be a part of that. The reason why I'm able to give this talk so emphatically today is this is how a podcast content strategist works. And this is also how the people that I work with think and create tools as well. So RadioPublic, where I work, builds tools to help podcasters spend more time making their show and less time making a website and a marketing presence. Because we know that those things are important for the ongoing existence of your podcast, but we also want those opportunities to be within everybody's grasp. So my motto, if you want to sustain yourself, be strategic to be efficient. Even doing 1 or 2 of the things I'm going to talk about today, that's gonna help you. It's gonna help you a lot, and I know that you're gonna be able to do it because all these slides available later, podcast, live stream, all of that, and there are a lot of resources that I'm going to share at the end as well. So, we're gonna do this. First, we're going to define a very important thing when we're talking about marketing. Yes, marketing. Marketing is what helps you grow your audience, and in order to start marketing, we need to know who's your audience. You have one main goal as a podcaster. You want people to listen to your podcast. All of the other goals, like connecting with your audience, engaging with your fans, and making money, all of that requires you to have listeners. Your main goal is to get people to listen to your podcast. So, a question you've probably been asking yourself already, who is the audience for your podcast's web presence? For the sake of this talk, there are 2 audiences of listeners. That first group, people who listen to podcasts already, that's you guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for existing, I love you. And you make this whole thing possible, all of the listeners that are like you. That second group are the people who haven't listened to a podcast yet. And a subset of this audience for me is people who've listened to a podcast, but they haven't listened to your podcast yet. So different yet complementary strategies for both of these audiences, and we're going to cover both, but I'm going to spend a lot more time focusing on that second audience, the people who haven't listened to a podcast yet. That is where true growing the pie audience growth is happening, and luckily, many of the strategies for this audience also helps with existing listeners too. Let's get this out of the way first, y'all. What isn't podcast web strategy? These are things that use the internet in some way or another and can make you feel like you're doing work on the web, but it isn't strategic. And that takes a lot of your time and energy without getting you where you want to go. The first thing, oh, we're gonna do this later. I hear this a lot. And the reason why I don't like it is it really translates to you're never going to do it. If you do something sometimes, if there's no reason for doing it, you're not motivated to spend time on it, and then you also aren't going to see any results. So that means posting an episode on Twitter sometimes isn't really a strategy, and neither is sending an email or updating your website when you remember to do it. If you integrate web strategy into web communications into your process, it's not only strategic, but it ends up saving time later. The second thing, web strategy is not engagement. And as a former social media strategist, if I can get any point across today other than the fact web strategy, you totally need that, garnering engagement does not equal the desired outcome that you're hoping for. For your podcast, you have one main goal, to help people listen to the podcast. Engagement with a social media post doesn't equal somebody listen to your podcast. You have to know what you're measuring for when you're doing things on the web smartly. And unlike podcast analytics, web analytics are something that you can start using to your advantage right away to understand both your efforts and your audience. The third thing, unmeasurable and unreplicable approaches mean that there are no clear outcomes. For podcast web strategy to work, there have to be questions and there have to be answers, even if you don't get the answer that you're expecting. Think about everything you're doing as a miniature experiment. Your thesis, did somebody listen to the podcast based on the action that I took? How will I know that the listening happened? And what else can I learn from this experiment? Get really clear on what you're trying to gain from somebody doing something on the web and figure out how you're going to have numbers and the outcomes to support your goal of increasing podcast listenership. Now that you know what you're not looking for, here is what we can and will do with podcast web strategy. This is where you're going to put your energy in smart and efficient ways to make audience growth happen both strategically and awesomely for your podcast. So, the first thing, we are going to take small and deliberate steps to building a digital strategy for your podcast. What this means if you're listening right now, choose one thing, just one, to get started on immediately after this talk or when you get home, either one. Something here that I'm going to talk about is going to speak to you, and you're going to go home and you're going to do it, and you're going to be amazing at it, and you're going to feel awesome for it, and you're also going to tell me about it because I love celebrating people doing this. It's going to work. There is no one single switch that we flip when it comes to podcast web strategy and audience growth. There are a lot of little small things that we do in order to get everything moving together in unison. The next, we are going to build awareness while bringing in new listeners. So awareness is a pretty easy goal for any campaign, but it's not going to be enough for us today. We're going to focus on activities that are intentional about bringing in new listeners. Awareness also means that the things that you do should feel good and right to the people who already listen to your podcast. And ideally, those people also see this campaign and will like it enough that they pass it on, which will never hurt. Last, we are going to be numbers informed, and we are going to learn from everything that we do so we have a model for replicable next steps. Each of these strategies, websites, email newsletters, and social media, all of them are web-based, which means there is some kind of analytics built in. Asking good questions that can be supported by answers will help you design and implement again next time. If you're a person out here with a website and newsletters and social media already, yes, awesome. The strategies I'm going to share here today should help you improve that web presence with an eye towards audience development. So, audience development, I think of it in two parts. There's audience growth and there's audience retention. Audience growth is getting new listeners. We're going to think first and foremost about the needs of the people who haven't listened to a podcast yet, because they help grow the whole pie, and they are the ones who need the most help to start listening. So we're going to get those new listeners in the door with a podcast website. Then we are going to retain your new listeners with email newsletters and social media campaigns. Luckily, both email and social also very good at helping move beyond this primary audience of listeners, making current listeners into fans who are going to also spread your show for you. So, podcast websites. Why do you want that thing? So, We are going to start with the podcast website because it helps us with ownership, findability, and simplicity. The first reason, ownership. This is both ownership over your content and how it's displayed, and it's also ownership of your relationships with your listeners. You're making this podcast, and you should have control how this is shown to people. And you should also have a direct connection with your listeners that isn't mediated through somebody else or through another platform. Your audience is loyal to you, and you should be able to connect with them directly. The alternative is that your audience belongs to somebody else. And since your listeners are the root of everything that you're building, that direct relationship is everything. Additionally, a relationship with a listener, it's always in development. So landing on your podcast website offers a number of different ways for a visitor to show interest in your podcast. So maybe they start listening, which is a very strong signal that they're interested in you, but it also might not be their first step. There are other smaller steps that a visitor might take first to begin their relationship with you. Maybe they're reading an article, or they click on a social media link, or they sign up for your newsletter. And all of those things are a signal that they are interested in you. If you use your website as a hub for listener engagement, it means that your visitors can come to you and your work on their terms. The second reason for a website is findability. A website is available all over the world, and people already know how to search for things on the web. When you add together ownership and findability, what you get is super solid search engine optimization. That means making sure your work is available and aligned with the people who are searching for it. Apps aren't always the default for listening for everybody, but web search, that is already second nature to us. A website assures that your show can be found by everybody, the new to podcast folks and the people who are new to your podcast too. The last reason is simplicity. Having a podcast website means that there's only one thing that you need to say and spell and remember on your show. One place to help your listeners and find everything they want related to your show, and it's also one place to convert all of those new visitors into listeners. Maintaining a website may sound like it's hard, but here's the thing. It's really important for the ongoing longevity of your podcast. This is how podcasts stick around for the future. And we're also going to spend time on this once, which is going to help you in the long term for your audience growth. I hope you're convinced that you need a podcast website, because I'm very much here to help you do that. But if you have a website already, we're gonna make sure that your website is doing all of the things that you want it to do, which is help people learn about and listen to your podcast. All of the building blocks of your podcast website help you establish your podcast elsewhere online, and it helps a listener start and deepen their relationship with you. So let's get that website looking good. There are some key elements to presenting your podcast on your website: gateway episodes, a host or contributor bio and headshots, a logline, listener testimonials and press mentions, a video trailer, a where to listen page, and original articles. We're going to go through all of them one by one so you know what they are, how to make them happen, and where else you can start to use them on the web right away. And all of the website versions I'm going to share here, they're all made with Podsites, which is RadioPublic's custom podcast website builder, and they were made very quickly. At least 2 of the ones you're going to see were made in less than a day. So, gateway episodes. These are known as a featured episode, a start here episode, or a highlighted episode. Gateway episodes are very important to new listeners. So when you're presented with a long list of episodes, it's kind of hard to know where to get started. So do we start at the top? Do we start at the bottom? Somewhere in the middle is probably going to be the most representative and best episode for somebody. From this episode, more listening will be a very natural next step. A Start Here episode provides a way for a podcaster to showcase a specific episode, just like a pinned post on social media. It's your way of saying, I know this is the good stuff, and I really want you to hear this one first. A great gateway episode has a few indicators, like an immediate hook. So a listener gets right in, and they can't help but want to continue listening. It works as a standalone piece with no inside jokes and no back references. It's also a can't miss episode. So if a listener only hears this one thing, they know what's up. But the most important thing about a gateway episode, it really leaves the listener hungry for more like it. They like this one, and then they want another, and another, and another. You can start choosing your gateway episodes by asking yourself which episodes are best, and you can also ask your listeners which they think are the best too. You can also start to look at your listening data for clues or confirmation that people have spent quality time with this episode as well. The easiest ones to start with tend to be a trailer, the first episode of a serialized narrative, or the first episode of season 1. Once you have that gateway episode, you can put them into action right away. So you can put it on the front page of your podcast website, or you can pin it to the top of your social media accounts. You can also add it to your press kit to help you with media outreach and publication outreach. And you can also start to let your fans know that these episodes exist through your email newsletter, so they can help introduce your show to new listeners too. One of the most wonderful things about podcasts, at least for me, hopefully for you too, is that I feel extremely connected to the voices that I hear on the show, which is awesome. But if someone has never listened to your podcast before and they don't know that warm feeling of your voice, they haven't pressed play yet. So you're gonna need to convince them that you are the person that they want to hear from. A short description of the people who make the show, both on the mic and behind the scenes, helps loads in this situation. I find that it's best when this bio is written in your voice, and it demonstrates your expertise, and it also says a little more about your place in the world. This information is also awesome for someone who's writing about your podcast because they'll get all of the relevant details of the people who make it all in one place. With that writing hat on, we are also going to write a logline, which is just a fancy phrase for saying a brief and compelling sentence that conveys the emotional need for your show. A logline is a little different from your podcast description or summary, because a description tends to go more in depth into the who and the where and the what of your podcast, and it also aids with search engine optimization. A logline, that tends to be a lot snappier to get somebody's attention, and it usually includes the why or the how. Writing a strong logline is an art, so a few tips on writing one. Focus on who is involved with making the show. Get really specific into the description of who these people are and their goal. You can also try to answer the following questions in one sentence. Who is involved? What are they doing? When is it happening? Why is it important? And how will it be addressed? Once you write that logline, you can also start to use it in a couple of different places, like your social media bio. There's a 160-character limit on Twitter, and that is excellent for writing a logline. It's also really beautiful on the back of your podcast business card, and it's a really good subtitle for the homepage of your podcast website. Cool, we've done a lot of writing, so it's time to pat ourselves on the back. We are going to look for a little bit of validation in the form of a listener testimonial. So a listener testimonial provides social proof that other people listen to you and love your show. The best testimonials are from a listener's point of view, and they point out something unique about the show. I find that the best testimonials also come from a listener's point of view and say something about the experience of listening to the show, like how they can't wait for the next episode, how connected they feel to the hosts, or what they're doing while they're listening. Listener testimonials will reinforce everything that you've already said about your podcast, but it specifically connects a current fan with a future listener. Apple Podcasts and Podchaser reviews are a really good place to start looking for those testimonials. You can also source them from social media or use your email inbox. And if you're also pretty early on in making your show, it is perfectly okay to ask for a listener testimonial directly. You can share an early episode with somebody and explain how their writing will help support your show moving forward. Another form of social proof is through receiving some kind of media coverage. The added benefit of press is that hopefully the people in the publication's audience will also find your show through all of their kind words. If you put your press mentions on your podcast website, it also helps new listeners arriving at your site from their article know that they're in the right place. So I'm going to assume that most podcasts are not going to be randomly found for press coverage. You're going to need to advocate for it, and that means you're going to need to reach out to writers with a package of useful things that help you write about the show. A robust podcast website is a form of a press kit, but you might also create a dedicated one that includes more background of the show, high-quality images of the creator, and steps on how to embed an episode of your podcast in their article. And you can put all of that on your podcast website. Once you have that press kit, you're going to identify a couple of people to send the podcast to and then pitch it to some writers. There could be a whole other presentation that I'm not going to go into now about how to get ready for media coverage and making the pitch. So super simple. Do your research into the writers, be respectful of their inboxes, their time, and their tastes, and always keep on pitching. We're gonna get a little creative here. Video trailers. I don't think that they're required, but I've been seeing them a lot more lately. And I think part of it is the fact that new listeners will press play on a video because it's familiar already. And when they do, it connects your voice with a visual, which makes the next step to press play on an episode even more natural. Your video trailer can be super simple. It can just be an audiogram with a static image and your existing podcast trailer audio. But you could also get a little fancier and do either archival footage or behind-the-scenes footage, or you can work with other artists or creators to expand your world with animation or original art. Once you have that video trailer, you can do a couple things with it. So wherever you upload the video, include a description of your podcast, not only because it helps with SEO, but now it's a link that's living out in the wild, which could be somebody's first introduction to your show. So also include the title and that logline you wrote, and a link to your podcast website and how to listen as well. So we've done a lot of work to get your podcast website set up for new listeners, and you've made an extra strong case about why they should listen to your podcast, and you've also helped them fall in love and press play on an episode of your show. We are going to turn all of those visitors into subscribers. So on your website, include a dedicated explanation on how to listen to your podcast. And that's not just a link to every single app, though having links to listening apps is also pretty smart. That How to Listen page is going to include step-by-step instructions on how to go from your website to a listening app. So it may have been a little while since you've done this process, but I implore you, please take the time to go through it step by step. Because the last thing we want is to lose somebody who got really excited about an episode of your podcast because you already assumed that they know how a listening app works. Podcast creators everywhere will end up thanking you because you just turned a new podcast fan into someone who knows how to listen to podcasts on their phone. Your podcast will just be their first. And that is word of mouth marketing that you can't buy. Somebody's first podcast will forever hold a place in their hearts and headphones. So we have spent a lot of time on websites, but here is actually the big reveal about why podcast websites. We are going to flip the engagement path on its head. So anything that you've thought about as additional supplementary content to continue engaging and deepening your relationship with listeners also serves as an entry point for your podcast from people who arrive because of your writing. And then they deepen their relationship with you by becoming a listener. So, case study from a couple of workers who I know are here. The podcast 70 Million from Lantigua Williams & Co. annotates their transcripts, and they create original reform toolkits for each episode. So now that's 3 possible entry points into one episode of the show: the episode, the annotated transcript, and the reform toolkit, which means that for 10 episodes in one season, there are now 30 entry points into the show just from that one season. I think that's really smart. One more thing on the podcast website front. So measurement in podcasting, okay, cool. Measurement in web is a really big part of how you define web strategy success. Google Analytics is incredibly robust, and when you use it, you can start to understand your visitor and listener activity on your site. So, are people listening to things on my site, and what apps are they using to listen? You can also start to see and measure the different individual elements of your marketing. Did linking to an episode help turn somebody into a listener, or did an article help bring in a new audience? All of these questions and way more are things that you can start to use to explore and answer when you use a podcast website as your hub for all of your web experiments. So, we've talked a lot about websites because they are the foundation of audience growth. Having your website in order is necessary so we can begin working on audience retention. In order to have your audience stick around, you have to have them in the first place. So, a little bit more familiar territory here: email newsletters. We're going to get an email newsletter together because it's going to add depth to your podcast, and it strengthens a direct connection between you and your audience. Ideally, that newsletter will provide just enough something different from your podcast to add additional insight, and it also will bring your listeners closer to you. I find that email newsletters take on 2 main forms: the regular update and the automated update. So, much like consistency in your podcast publishing schedule, consistency in an email newsletter is something to strive for as well. Since these messages are timely to your show, you can time them according to what's happening with your podcast. So, repackaging a new episode while you're in season with either an article on your website or a tweet thread, that can also turn into repackaging for your newsletter. And in the off-season, you can help keep all of your listeners close to you with a sneak peek into what's happening, so they're extra excited to come back when you have more episodes. And there's also the newsletter-only exclusive, like a special announcement that will keep an audience in the know about all of your big things while rewarding them for your loyalty. Drip campaigns are a form of automated email. Now, I know what you're thinking: automated emails, I'm not a robot, my listeners are not robots, don't fear. So I actually find that these are really great because they meet a listener where they are, when something might be relevant to them. A bonus thing about this is that an automated message is something you set up once, and they continue to send and engage with your fans regardless of when they happen to join you. Another benefit of these messages is that because they're timely for your recipients, they seem to have much higher engagement rates than regular messages. I am an avid newsletter subscriber, so I'm always looking for examples of these campaigns. So if you're doing this, please let me know. I love seeing all of these in action. So a couple ways you can use this already. If you have something exclusive and special to share with your fans, Use it as an automated welcome message. I once got a secret audio file as a welcome, which was super duper cool. I also received a thrilling message about 3 months ago. Did you know you've been subscribed to my newsletter for 3 months? Thank you for being here. And they did a really smart thing, which was they included a short description of the host's favorite episode, and then they pointed me to their website to start listening. I loved the behind-the-scenes anecdotes they provided, and I also now had a perfect gateway episode to introduce this podcast to new people. You can also use the anniversary of your podcast or an anniversary of someone subscribing as a cause for an automated celebration. So use it to encourage your listeners to respond with stories of how they found your show, or you can ask them to share their favorite episodes with you as well. Since I'm all about the efficient processes, I've broken down the pieces of a good newsletter here. Subject line, header image, a greeting, the message itself, the closing, and the short signature. Every time you plan a newsletter, you'll be starting from this template that you have made just for your podcast. You can also start to get a little more elaborate with the contents, like mimicking the segments of your podcast in your newsletter. So you could include an ad break to mention a show's sponsor or a podcast cross-promotion, and you can also close out a message with credits and thanks, much like you would at the end of an episode. Email subscriptions can also feel kind of elusive the same way that podcast subscriptions do, so 2 quick tips. My first tip is to use your podcast website as a place to direct people to sign up for the newsletter, and you can also mention it with a link in your episode notes as well. For new visitors, a newsletter might be that super low-key action that they need to start a relationship with you. And for your existing listeners, a newsletter gives them another way to love you beyond your audio. And my second tip is to make a newsletter worth reading. So think about what a newsletter reader really needs, and imagine what's going to make that fan click on a message from you immediately when they receive it. So also, read more newsletters, especially podcast newsletters. I highly recommend Death, Sex, and Money because they are yet another dimension of their show. I find it has the same warmth and closeness of every episode while also reminding me to either listen or extending the goodness of the episode that I already heard. Super nerdy secret here, I love email newsletter software. It is incredibly useful. So not only does it help you manage your email list and make those really lovely email templates and set up those automated drip campaigns, it is also very robust in its measurement as well. Data from your email newsletter can help you get a sense of what subject lines are doing well, what percentage of your emails are opened, and what links readers are clicking on. And when you use your podcast website links in your newsletter, you can also start to take actions and what your readers are doing through your podcast website analytics as well. And all of those little data points, they are extremely helpful when it comes to strategically tying a newsletter and the rest of the web. If there's a subject line that did really well with a high open rate, that can inform a social media post. And audience interaction rates are yet another set of numbers you can provide to a sponsor. So, before we close out, social media time. I'm not going to talk about regular social media postings because I find that that's something that a solid editorial calendar and commitment will help you maintain. Regular posts also tend to be a little bit more about the existing audiences than the new audiences. So instead, we're going to discuss a social media campaign. A campaign is focused, targeted, and coordinated, and it's got a goal. So with a little bit of money and good framing, a campaign can easily turn into an audience retention and growth strategy. Some of the big picture questions to ask yourself: what's special right now and why? How long will this campaign run? What is our budget and how will we spend it? Who should know about this and where are they located? How will we know that this campaign is successful? All of these questions help you figure out the parameters before you start to figure out a game plan. A campaign's limited time span and focus also helps you with goal setting and measurement. So we're going to use what's called a SMART goal, a specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound goal. I also like to make my SMART goals smarter by adding in evaluation and revision, because if everything's an experiment, you're constantly learning from what you're doing all the time. By looking at your results and revising for next time, you will hopefully improve with every new audience development experiment. I find that writing out a sentence about a campaign can also help us keep our eyes on the prize. So, for example, in setting this goal, I would like to double the number of people who are subscribed to my podcast from 250 to 500 in the 10 weeks between the start of season 2 and the end of season 2. You can also go a little deeper and say why this is an important goal to have as well. So, doubling my subscribers will help me make a case to my advertisers that I have a strong listener following so I can ask for a higher CPM moving into season 3. Lastly, paint in very broad strokes how you might achieve this goal as a very loose framework. So I will ask my email subscribers to share an episode with 3 friends on social media and tag the show, and I will also guest on 3 aligned podcasts with active fan communities on social media. Those 3 sentences are a template for your day-to-day and week-by-week plans for a social media campaign. And luckily, social media dashboards provide some analytics data, especially if you're running a paid campaign. I highly, highly, highly recommend sending people, surprise, to their podcast website during the campaign as well, because you'll have even more robust analytics about what people are doing once they arrive there. So, audience development, it is ongoing and it is a process. And I do believe that setting up your podcast right on the internet means that you will continue to grow. With each and every new episode you put out, with every newsletter you send, and with every social media campaign you develop and execute. All those in-depth insights come from intentionally creating those building blocks and connecting the dots between your podcast and the rest of the web. So, your next steps. As I said, you got homework now. You're going to polish up your podcast website for all of your new listeners. And if you need a website, RadioPublic, I am very happy to help. Everything I shared here today has a companion strategy guide with lots and lots of examples. And all of those can be found at bit.ly/agreatpodcast website. All of that is in lowercase. RadioPublic also has a podcasters hub, which has lots of resources for improving and growing your show, including a free podcast marketing course at podcasters.radiopublic.com. All you need, podcast RSS feed to sign up. And we and I are regularly writing about podcast web strategy at about.radiopublic.com. And if there's anything you're thinking about related to podcasts and the web, we are actually thinking about them too. So, guess what, guys? I'm going to celebrate every success you have. Please get in touch with me on Twitter and via email. I can't wait to celebrate all of the ways in which you are going to creatively connect podcasts and the rest of the internet. Thank you.